The fierce hurricanes we've seen recently are a reminder of the worsening effects of climate change, but our response to those big storms has largely stayed the same, and that is why emergency management teams are looking for new ways to adapt to this unpredictable climate we're in. Joining me with more on this is Claire Knox, a professor specializing in emergency management at the University of Central Florida. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's start with a study from 2020, and it found that nearly half of today's North Atlantic hurricanes are reaching major intensity. What does that mean? That's an increase of 260% from about 40 years ago. We know hurricanes are changing, getting stronger. Why isn't our response changing?
So a lot of that is the fact that emergency management is very responsive. We're struggling with transitioning into being more proactive. And we're really great at documenting lessons learned, but actually implementing them, we struggle with that.
Why?
So a lot of it is the capacity of the different levels of government. Every disaster starts and ends locally. So a lot of times we could have all of the resources, but if there's no political capacity, no political will to implement these best practices, then it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. So what changes do need to happen now?
So there's a number of changes that need to happen. Where I come from, where I sit in my research on planning, is the fact that we need to take those best practices, take them with our hazard mitigation strategies that are identified and very detailed, implement that into land use plans. Prime example is not allowing new development into flood zones and into high hazard areas. We continue to see that across the nation, and not just here in the United States, but around the world. And so being able to incorporate the reducing those new developments in those high hazard areas is just one step toward that resiliency goal.
So you were in Orlando, I understand, as Hurricane Milton hit Florida. What stood out to you in terms of response?
What stood out to me is, as someone who studies disasters back to the 90s here in Florida all the way through currently Milton, is that it is actually exciting to see some of those best practices being implemented at a small scale. And it's little things, and unless you're looking for it, you're not going to necessarily see it. But what we saw specifically with the evacuations is that we saw more people taking heed of the evacuation orders to get out. And our research highlights there's a couple reasons why that might be. One is that we had Helene, who we just had the impacts from along our west coast of Florida. And so the fact that that was very fresh on people's mind, it is a good indicator that people are going to leave. And so that with an active hurricane season, we're able to see people actually evacuate. And so right now, we're not seeing a whole lot of deaths because people got out of harm's way, which is good. And we didn't see that.
Do you think also the language that was being used by officials? Like, I hadn't heard an official say it so clearly before, saying, if you stay, you will die. Like, that was a quote from one of the officials. Do you think that had an impact?
Possibly. I've heard that language before in a couple of other disasters, just again, having studied the after action reports. But what we're seeing is change in some of the language, helping people understand their risk better and understand their risk in advance of the storm, even in advance of the season, knowing your evacuation zones. The state of Florida's Division of Emergency Management actually released a interactive GIS-based mapping system where people could enter their address and find out exactly which evacuation zone they're in, which orders have been issued. So using that technology in a new way to help communicate people's risks.
A big part of effective effort is collective effort. How can we ensure better communication between, government agencies and crews on the ground?
So what we're seeing is that local government, especially since the 2017 Hurricane Irma, we've seen an increase in the use of social media and very specific uses of social media. So multiple platforms, going even to like Nextdoor, where you can go down to a specific neighborhood and provide that very specific information. But that is just part of a large toolbox that emergency managers can use with our traditional media to get information out. What we're still struggling with, and I think we're trying to get better at, is communicating in more than just English. Here in the state of Florida, we have Spanish speakers as a very dominant language here. And yet in 2017, my research showed that less than 1% of all tweets were in Spanish.
Wow. Well, listen, Professor Claire Knox, we appreciate your time and your insight on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.